This Roblox player dared his best friend to climb something he should never have touched. By sunset, one of those boys was frozen high in the dark, unable to move at all. And the reason he ever started climbing is something every single kid watching this needs to hear. Mason and Eli had been best friends since the very first day of the second grade. They lived 4 houses apart on the same quiet street in a small American town. Every night after homework, they logged onto Roblox and built worlds together for hours. Mason was the loud one, who always had a plan and a new dare ready to go. Eli was the quiet one, who almost always said yes to whatever Mason wanted to do. That was simply how their friendship worked, and it had worked that way for many years. Mason led and Eli followed, and neither of them ever really stopped to question it. Eli was scared of heights, and Mason had known that fact since they were small boys. Once, when they were 9, Eli froze halfway up a tree and Mason coached him down. Mason never forgot how badly Eli's hands had shaken. Yet that summer, he let himself forget. On the edge of their town stood an old water tower that everyone in town could see. It rose almost 120 feet above the trees out near the highway. For as long as anyone could remember, kids had whispered about climbing it on a dare. A faded sign on the fence read in peeling red letters, "Danger, high voltage." Nobody Mason knew had ever actually made it past the second platform of that rusted ladder. That summer, that fact slowly stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like a challenge. There was a group of older boys that Mason wanted badly to impress that whole summer. They skateboarded behind the gas station and treated Mason and Eli like annoying little kids. Eli did not care about those older boys, but he cared about staying close to Mason. So when Mason started chasing their approval, Eli quietly went along with it for the ride. It was a warm evening in the middle of July when everything finally came to a head. The older boys were hanging around the open field that ran right up to the tower fence. One of them looked up at the tower and laughed that nobody their age had the guts. Mason felt every single eye turn toward him, and he felt his face go hot with shame. So he did the thing he would regret for the rest of his life, without even thinking. He turned to Eli, grinned wide, and said, "My boy Eli will do it. Right, Eli?" The older boys cheered, and suddenly Eli was the center of a crowd he never once wanted. Eli looked at Mason with an expression that Mason would spend years of his life trying to forget. It was not excitement on Eli's face at all. It was the look of a boy who felt trapped. Eli wanted to say no, but 10 older kids were watching, and his best friend was smiling. Here is something that scientists have learned about the teenage brain that explains that exact moment. When other kids are watching, a teenager's brain lights up far more for reward than for danger. Eli's brain, standing in that crowd, was screaming about being liked and going quiet about the fall. So Eli did not say no. He set his backpack down and walked slowly toward the fence. And what happened in the next 20 minutes would change both of those boys forever. Eli climbed over the chain link fence while the older boys filmed him on their glowing phones. Mason stood at the bottom, grinning up, telling himself this was the best night of his life. The first part of the climb was easy, and Eli moved up the metal ladder very quickly. Rung after rung, he rose up past the trees while the crowd below cheered him even higher. Climbing up, it turns out, is the easy part, and that is exactly where the trap hides. Your body has something to grip and a clear direction, and the adrenaline keeps pushing you upward. Eli reached the narrow platform that circled the huge metal tank at the very top of the tower. For one moment, he stood almost 120 feet up, arms raised, and the crowd roared. Then Eli made the one mistake that freezes almost every climber. He finally looked straight down. The ground swung beneath him. The platform felt tiny, and his legs locked completely into place. He tried to find the first rung with his foot, but his body simply would not move. This is the part that the older boys filming him had never once thought about that night. On real towers, rescuers say the climb up is easy, but raw fear freezes kids at the top. One boy of 15 once climbed a tower nearly 200 feet high and froze exactly like this. Up on the platform, Eli wrapped both of his arms around a metal post and began to cry. Down below, the loud cheering slowly stopped, and the group of older boys went very, very quiet. And that silence was the moment Mason finally understood that his best friend might not come back down. Mason screamed up at Eli to climb down, but Eli could not even turn his head to look. The older boys grabbed their skateboards and scattered into the dark, leaving Mason standing completely alone. For a few long seconds, Mason just stood there, frozen by the same fear gripping his friend. Then he did the first truly brave thing he had done all night long. He called for help. Mason pulled out his phone with violently shaking hands and dialed the number 911. He told the operator that his best friend was stuck at the top of the water tower. Then he called Eli's mother, and he heard her drop everything in her kitchen and start running. Within minutes, red and white lights were flooding the dark field beneath the enormous metal tower. Firefighters arrived, and a special rescue team began pulling on harnesses and ropes down at the base. They told Mason that the high-voltage equipment near the top made the whole situation far more dangerous. They warned that on towers like this, electricity can sometimes arc across the open air without contact. A rescuer climbed slowly toward Eli, talking to him in a low and steady voice the entire way. It took a very long time, because a terrified body high in the air does not move easily. At one point, Eli's foot slipped right off a rung, and Mason felt his own heart stop completely. But the rescuer had already clipped a safety line onto him, and that thin line held him. Inch by careful inch, the two of them came back down the long ladder together in the dark. When Eli's feet finally touched the soft grass, his mother reached him before anyone else even could. She held him tightly while he shook, and Mason stood a few feet away, unable to speak. But the hardest part of this whole story was not the climb, and it was not the rescue. It was the thing that Eli quietly said to Mason 3 days later, sitting on his bed. Eli told Mason that he had known the entire time that climbing that tower was completely insane. Then he said the one sentence that Mason has carried with him every single day since then. Eli stared at the floor and quietly said, "I climbed it because I was scared to lose you." He had not been afraid of the tower nearly as much as he feared being left behind by Mason. And that is the part of this story that I really need you to sit with for a moment. Eli almost died, not because of a tower, but because saying no felt more dangerous than falling. A real friend will never, ever make the price of staying friends something as huge as your safety. If somebody only keeps you around when you obey every single dare, that was never real friendship. And the bravest word a person can possibly say in front of a cheering crowd is simply no. Mason almost lost the one true friend who had loved him since they were little, over nothing. Eli came home from the hospital with a brace, a long recovery, and a lot of bad dreams. Both boys ended up talking with a school counselor about everything that had happened that summer night. Mason learned that the guilt of daring someone is a weight you end up carrying for a long time. Eli slowly learned that he was truly allowed to say no, even to the people he loved the most. Their friendship survived, but it was rebuilt on something new and far stronger than dares and approval. It stood on honesty now, and on a promise that neither boy would ever push the other again. If you are watching this and a group is daring you to do something dangerous tonight, please stop. The people worth keeping in your life are the ones who feel relieved when you finally say no. And if you are ever the one holding the phone, calling for help is the bravest move there is. Have you ever been dared to do something you knew was wrong, just to fit in with everyone? Tell me what you did down in the comments below, because somebody else really needs to hear it. If you watched all the way to the end, then you already understand what this story was about. Subscribe so you never miss another true story that could help you keep someone you love safe. Take care of each other out there, and I will see you in the very next one.